Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Eric Kavanagh, host of DM Radio.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to this wonderful component of Subsurface. Yours truly, Eric Kavanagh here. I am humbled and honored to be part of this conversation today, folks. We're going to be talking to Tomer Shiran, the founder and CPO for Dremio, and also Jeremy Rader, GM of Enterprise Strategy and Solutions Group at Intel. And folks, what an amazing event this has been so far. I just wanted to say one quick thing before we dive into the conversation. I've been tracking open source since back in about 2005 when I did some research into transparency in federal spending. And I was amazed at how much traction they had already had. So this is back in the early days of Apache. And if you look at what's happening in the industry now, open source is everywhere. Open source is a de facto standard. And one of the coolest things about open source as a movement is that before we had all this traction, developers and companies all around the world spent most of their time reinventing wheels. They had to reinvent the whole stack every time. Well, what happened? Linux, of course, pioneered, changed things. Thank you, Linus Torvalds. But he's not the only one. This whole data space opened up back in the late aughts, basically, and now is just screaming forward. And of course, Apache Arrow, you may have heard about on the show today, some of the really remarkable innovations in that, and also Apache Iceberg doing some really cool stuff to reimagine the entire architecture of analytics. And of course, in the information economy, look at all the coolest companies that are going public these days and all the cool companies that are just startups. They're all leveraging data. They're all leveraging data at scale. And that's, I think, one of the key terms to really understand and appreciate is scale. So I was watching the show on Apache Iceberg today, and Ryan Blue was talking about queries at internet scale on your data lake. This is amazing stuff, folks. You can do this kind of analysis so much faster than ever before, and that really enables businesses to innovate, to move forward. And of course, we all have to do that these days in a post-COVID world or almost post-COVID world. But let's go ahead and dive in. First, Tomer Shiran, thank you so much for all your effort, and your team did a fantastic job today. Of course, Jeremy, thank you for joining us today. I'll throw the first question, I guess, over to Jeremy. You know, people think of Intel as a manufacturer, a company that creates chips, obviously, but you also have 25,000 developers. I thought that was fascinating. Can you talk about what these developers do and how they're pushing forward innovation for the data lake?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. You know, I've been here for 24 years, over 24 years. I spent 15 years in Intel IT. So I've talked to a lot of people over that period of time. And you're right. Most people think of Intel as a hardware only company, but we do have 25,000 software developers. And so we recognized a long time ago that the only way to really get the most out of your hardware is to truly understand software. So for decades, we've had these thousands of software engineers across the globe partnering with the ISV community, partnering or diving into open source communities to really deliver that ongoing kind of performance, scalability, power efficiency, security, like all the things that we care about growing over time. You know, that's what they've been really focused on. So we're really involved in a number of open source foundations like Linux and Apache. We've engaged in tons of open source areas, whether it's Presto, Apache Arrow, Spark, Java, right? The list goes on. And ultimately, our goal is that we can pull through as much value as possible, make it as easy to plug and play those different capabilities as companies and as enterprises leverage those open source capabilities. We want all of that value of those hardware innovations to just simply work, right? And that takes 25,000 developers. That takes a big focus on software. So it's a big area for us. It's, you know, how to take memory and CPU network accelerators and package that up with this great thriving open source community and enable enterprises to really innovate.
Yeah, and that's the key, right? It's a thriving community, and there's so much collaboration, even across industries, with competitors getting together to work on the foundation, to build out that foundation so we can all benefit, right? It's like the rising tide lifts all boats, right? The rising open source community lifts all endeavors and really facilitates very precise, granular innovation for particular companies, because that's how you excel. That's how you win, is you're a little bit better than your competition. And if you can focus on what makes you special and not worry about reinventing wheels, that's a big, big deal. So Tomer, let me throw this one over to you, as Jeremy is mentioning, that synergy of hardware and software is so important. It's really important to understand what comes out. So in these new chips, there are new chipset instructions you can leverage. Can you talk about what you folks have done at Dremio to really optimize that synergy?
Yeah, look, we've been partnering with Intel and really kind of collaborating on our mutual roadmaps, and it helps to understand what's coming out with the latest CPUs and what capabilities are also available in some of those software kind of foundational layers. Early on at Dremio, we co-created a project called Apache Arrow, which you mentioned, and the idea there was at the time we had started with our own internal memory format, which was columnar, because we wanted to leverage the vectorized instructions in Intel CPUs, things like AVX 512, for example, that let you run the same instruction on multiple data elements, right, in a single clock cycle. And that was obviously very advantageous for us because we were able to get much faster performance. And we then decided, well, what if we could take Dremio's internal memory format and open source that and potentially turn that into an industry standard? And what ended up happening, was a lot more than we imagined at the time. But today it's downloaded over 20 million times a month, Apache Arrow, and basically used by tons of different technologies that are out there. And so now that's also opened the doors to all sorts of new kind of ways of integration, right? Because when you have standards, and it's part of the benefit, standards for in-memory, things like Arrow, standards for disk, like Parquet files and iceberg tables. And so we're constantly pushing the envelope in terms of, how close can we get to the hardware in these different foundational elements, right? It's Arrow as an example of leveraging these vectorized instructions, SIMD instructions, being able to take advantage of different kinds of memory in the architecture, all for the benefit of ultimately faster performance.
Yeah, and when you open source, you open it up to the entire community, right? So you're basically opening the kimono to let everyone understand what we're working on. And because we can all share that knowledge and share that infrastructure, then we can all build purpose-built solutions on top of that, right? That's the key, right, Tomer?
Yeah, exactly right. So you may not open source all of your IP, of course, because you want to have a competitive advantage in the market. But for some of these kind of foundational components, especially where it's advantageous to have lots of developers from different companies kind of contributing, right? And one of the things that's benefited us is the fact that Intel has among those 25,000 engineers has some that are working on Apache Arrow, and that helps Dremio tremendously in our performance and our ability to leverage the latest CPUs.
Yeah, that's really cool stuff. And I'll throw this one over to you, Jeremy. The whole product life cycle of chip design, it takes years. I mean, I don't know if it's 10 years, 8 years, 12. I'm sure it varies depending upon the particular project. But that requires a lot of foresight. It requires a lot of vision. It requires a whole product and partner ecosystem out there. Can you talk about how Intel leverages that ecosystem to align forces to make sure that there's no sort of human impedance mismatch, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Tomer just mentioned it. The ability for us to get involved with these open source communities, these foundations, like that's our learning ground. We get to see what's happening. We get to find the trends. We get to see where there's bottlenecks. We get to just learn from that community. And those trends, whether it's in areas like, open data lake, data warehousing, analytics, open data space in general, those insights, that's our map towards that product portfolio. We get to figure out where are we on the right track, where are we not, pushing the limits enough, where are we innovating, and also there's an aspect of what's really important to that workload. How much does hardware play? How much is the ecosystem and the alignment of that ecosystem going to play? What's happening in cloud versus on-premise versus everything in the middle versus edge? So all those factors help us really understand, is our portfolio keeping pace and are we getting ahead of it? Because this isn't just about being an enabler. We want to actually be an innovator with folks that are out there disrupting the market. That's where companies like Dremio are making a critical difference. We get to actually leverage that vibrant community that we just talked about. How much was it? 20 million downloads a month. So that's our insight, right? We get to learn from that, and we get to take that and really shape that portfolio. And yes, it does take time, but you got to get ahead of it, and you got to really look at where that puck is going. And those trends are just, again, critically important to our entire portfolio, not just CPU, but what's happening in memory, what's happening in network, kind of where are those bottlenecks shifting as we get more and more advanced in these workloads?
Yeah, that's such a great point that you just made there. I see Tomer nodding as well. You want to understand where is the bottleneck now, right? Sometimes it shifts to the network, then it's CPU, then that's hardware, or whatever. You have to know where it's going. And I guess that leads to my next question, Jeremy, which is how important is the data lake in the product roadmap for Intel?
So first, very important. And then as we click into that a little bit, let's talk, the talk of the town is analytics and AI. Companies keep talking about how they're becoming data-centric companies, data-driven companies. And it turns out to do all of that, you need data. And so, for us, the understanding this space and ensuring that we not only are keeping pace, but again, innovating with the innovators on the next big thing. This is how we can help with, as data discovery changes, reporting is changing, self-service is changing, cloud is changing. There's so much changing in this space that, again, data lake plays a central role. Some of these advanced workloads we're seeing transform over time, whether it's how people traditionally used a data lake could have been just EDW offload or ways to save some additional dollars in their enterprise. Now it's long-running workloads, self-service, it's more real-time. That means that those kind of the way we thought of data lake a decade ago, totally different than the way we think of data lake today. So, I love seeing what Dremio is doing again with some of that abstracted SQL on top of those database engines. I think we have a lot to learn about this domain. I think the ink is still really wet, so it's important for us to really stay relevant and connected to the ecosystem. But data lake to me is just that foundational component to enabling these very advanced workloads to really help our business groups. That's what enterprise is there to do, is help businesses really answer that next important question before their competition does.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the whole idea here is to focus on business value, right? And Tomer, I'll throw this over to you. It feels to me, and I've been watching this for at least 20 years now, like the pace of innovation is accelerating these days, which is so exciting. It's a bit bewildering at times, just trying to stay on top of everything that's happening because there's innovation everywhere. I feel like we're hitting on all cylinders, and I'll throw this over to you. I think Jeremy is right. The data lake is now the new de facto standard. It's the de facto foundation for the data plane, if you will. And if you can build all of your innovation on top of that, then you don't have to spend all this time and effort moving data around. All this ETL. I'm talking 14 years ago when we launched DM Radio, I thought to myself, when is this madness going to end? When are we going to stop spending so much time and effort moving massive amounts of data around and around and around? And then you lose quality. It costs money. It costs people. It's not fun, right? The analytics, that's the fun part. But what do you think, Tomer?
Yeah, I think the database was for many years the kind of the foundational piece, right? So everything was done that way. And if you wanted to do any kind of analysis, you had to put data in a database. And that really didn't change for many years. And the amount of data continued to grow and grow exponentially year over year. And more recently also the demand for data. We hire folks out of school now, and they come into the office and they know SQL, right? They learned SQL in school, and they don't want a report on their desk Monday morning. They want, hey, where do I connect to the system to run my queries? And so when you have that much data and that much demand for data, you can't be waiting around for somebody to go move data from one system to another. And in these big companies, it starts to get really complicated once you start dealing with data warehouses. You have all sorts of data warehouses and data marts, and you're in this never-ending complexity of ETL. In fact, one of our customers, one of the biggest tech companies in the world, running executive dashboards, and previously they were taking data out of S3, putting it in a data warehouse, pre-processing it, and then moving it into a number of data marts just so they can have fast, sub-second query performance. Well, the result of that was that every time one of the executives wanted changes to a dashboard or changes to a data set, it would be 3 to 6 weeks of wait because it was a bunch of engineering sprints that had to get scheduled and executed. And so this new kind of innovation that's happening now in this world of cloud data lakes and lakehouses, what we're doing really is all about providing the performance that you need directly on the data lake so you don't have to move the data into another system. And then it becomes minutes to address any kind of change or need.
Yeah, and I think that's so
critical. Go ahead.
Eric, to that, I think no one's patient enough for that anymore. When I was in Intel IT, driving analytics and AI, it was very much about those reports, who's doing the report and when is it needed. If you do that now, you'll just wake up to 6 or 7 more instances in cloud that popped up where the business group has said, I'm not waiting, I'm going to go create this myself. So it's very important to have these very fast-paced output mechanisms that can keep some level of control, governance, security, all those pieces that you still want in place. But you ultimately, this idea of moving data around it's not, you can't keep pace.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, I remember watching the evolution of data warehousing, which, really took 35, 40 years to get to where we are today. And of course, now in the cloud, things are happening, some exciting stuff there. But if you look at the speed of innovation in the data lake, it's much faster. And I think that's because we can benefit from this open source community and all the innovations that are happening everywhere. You just have to pay attention and stay in touch with people. That's a collaborative thing. Real quick, I'll throw it over to Tomer before I send something to Jeremy. Go ahead, Tomer, comment on that if you would.
Yeah, I think the open source element leads to faster innovation. I think it also is what enables the kind of the open data architecture, the benefits of that, right? The fact that you have data stored in open formats, whether it's open file formats like Parquet files or open table formats like Iceberg and Delta Lake. That is then what allows you to have Dremio serving your SQL and BI workloads, and Spark and things like Databricks and EMR serving your ETL and data science workloads. You have Flink, Kafka for streaming. So you have all these different engines also working together on the same data, and that's a lot more than what you could get from a single data warehouse vendor, right? If you put the data in a data warehouse, all you can use is what that one company creates for you, right? And you have this open architecture. You're getting a lot of innovation that's benefiting you from many different companies. With folks like Intel, helping to optimize kind of that core element, right?
Yeah, and speaking of, Jeremy, let me throw this over to you. I know I myself, the first time I heard about it, was very excited, and so many people I talked to are very fired up about Optane, about these new Optane chips. Can you talk about that and what makes them special? This whole concept of persistent memory is a really big deal, right?
It's a big deal, especially you're talking about these big databases. If you have a unforeseen power outage, you have something from that perspective. Persistence is very important. So I'm very excited about Optane because it's kind of near and dear to my roots in analytics and these kind of more advanced ways of leveraging data. We talk about enterprises. So many of them are in this digital transformation, data-centric shift that's happening. And so that means they're capturing more data, they're analyzing more data, they're securing more data. It's becoming massive and complex. And so as data growth is accelerating, so is the demand on our compute. You want more performance out of compute. Well, when compute performance goes up, then demand for memory tends to scale along with it. So today you can do that with DRAM. You can move, there's great benefits to DRAM, low latency, but DRAM is really expensive. And it's volatile, means power makes a big difference. So DRAM is kind of quickly becoming this very expensive component of the modern BOM, as you build servers and as you build out your data centers. So on the other side, you have kind of this block storage, which it's large. Now you get into cheap, it's persistent, but super slow. And now there's a problem because we're talking about advanced workloads that need that speed. So Optane's this great sort of bridge in those different technologies. Persistent memory, you get this kind of unique combination where you can get large capacity, it's performant, it supports persistence. So I'm very excited about it. I think it serves a really important niche in this market of analytics and AI and databases. So we continue to advance this a lot. If you look at our third generation Intel Xeon scalable processor, Intel Optane's PMEM's it's a 200 series. Now you can really develop platforms that have the right hierarchy of memory and storage, cost and performance, persistence. All that becomes now fully tunable for the enterprise. And I think that's the piece that I'm really excited about. I think it unlocks a lot of new opportunity in this space because it's innovation, and this is an area that's innovating a lot.
Yeah, and Tomer, you mentioned open data architecture. Open source is important. Open standards are at least as important, it seems to me. And one of the cool things about an open data architecture, as you've articulated, is that it allows you to not just take advantage of all the innovation today, but it also allows you to future-proof your architecture to a certain extent. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I think the one constant thing that exists today is change, right? And so we all have to be aware of that and plan for that and build our architectures in a way that can accommodate change as it's happening in the business. So one of the benefits of this kind of open architecture, the cloud data lake, is the fact that you have your data stored in open formats, right? You're not storing them in proprietary formats in S3. It's actually stored in open source formats that you can access from Dremio and many other engines. And so tomorrow, when there's some new technology comes up, some new startup or open source project is introduced, you can bring that up and point that at your data and start using it, right? It doesn't become a 5-year migration process from some existing thing to some new thing the way it was. It's always been in these monolithic data warehouses.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really important thing now in terms of thinking about the platform for the future, and everybody wants that enterprise-wide data platform to democratize data, make it accessible to everybody, and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about some of the challenges real quick too. So Jeremy, I'll throw it over to you. There are mindset issues that have to be addressed. There's alignment. I mentioned already collaboration is just fantastic these days, and it's not just in our space. It's all over the place. Thanks to the cloud, thanks to all sorts of innovations, we can now collaborate in real time on documents, inside environments, on a data platform. I get all excited about this layer of abstraction that allows you to make changes and let the data sit where it is. But talk to us about the challenges for a minute. What are you seeing? What are some of your partners telling you? Where do we have to work on the rough spots?
Yeah, actually, if you've been, Tomer's points along the way are so many of the challenges. Vendor lock-in is a major issue in my mind, because innovation means that there will be some new concept. There'll be a first-party solution coming out of a hyperscaler. Some of your traditional vendors that you're leveraging are going to potentially acquire companies and bring new innovation to the forefront. So I think it's very important that we watch vendor lock-in. I love the idea of developing these technologies that enable you to again innovate across the different platforms. Democratizing data, to Tomer's point earlier, this is not easy. It's not easy to get access out to all of the business groups, but getting ahead of that, looking at security, looking at your governance strategies in a multi-cloud, multifaceted environment, especially now it's no longer about the data center. You're in the cloud or clouds. You're using SaaS solutions. You're at the edge. So really, understanding how to overcome that and using these kind of abstracted layers, I think, are great tools to enable more simplicity in what is like a ever-growing complex world. So I think that's a big piece. I think time to output is also another one. The idea, and again, Tomer mentioned this earlier, 3 to 6 weeks to get a new dashboard or a new report. Nobody has that patience at all. You've got to be able to move fast, and you have to have the mechanisms in place. And if you have an outdated, architecture or way that you've developed your enterprise that doesn't enable speed, your business groups will find a way. It may not be the way that everyone wants it to be, but they will find a way to get access to the information they need. So, again, this idea of being flexible, not being locked in, having this leverage of this open source space, which is growing at leaps and bounds, hard to keep pace, frankly, with how much it's growing. Those are the areas I think can help you overcome the challenges and not get trapped, not get into a space where you can't innovate at the pace of your business.
Yeah, Tomer, I had a conversation with a good friend of mine the other day who is a senior developer at a very large company, Fortune 2000 company. He was asking for advice on some big project with MongoDB migrating to a new system or something. And I said, well, have you thought about really building out your data platform? Because then you're not just solving this latest problem, you're solving future problems. You're basically helping the organization avoid future bottlenecks, future problems, future political fights. I think that's kind of one of the things that happened with the data warehouse, because it was so expensive and so coveted that it became a political construct. And then you had to navigate around politics just to get access to it. We don't want that, right? So he was kind of struggling. He's like, wow, that's kind of an interesting idea. What do you think about that? Trying to encourage companies not just to focus on solving the latest red light that's flashing on their console, but look down the road, build out your data platform, knowing it's going to take some time, but also knowing you're going to be solving so many future problems. What do you think, Tomer?
Yeah, I think that should be a requirement almost in a company today, right? Is not just thinking about point solutions, for a specific problem, because then it becomes, very quickly, you start getting into other problems, right? And that's always been the problem with the data warehouse. Now you have in the cloud data warehouses, you have the same types of issues around cost, and very quickly the company gets to a point where they start restricting it because it's 7 times more expensive than they thought it would be after a year's worth of real usage. So I think the investing and of course, being one of the companies that's kind of enabling this new paradigm, you could say I'm biased, but I think in investing in the platform, right, that allows companies to do all these different things with their data, is just so beneficial. I mean, just lots of different use cases that you can then do, and you're really future-proofing yourself.
Yeah, and the other thing, you mentioned governance. Yeah, you mentioned governance, Jeremy. And I'll tell you what, if you embrace a data platform for your information architecture, for your strategy, and you really head down that road, you're going to be enabling yourself to achieve actual data governance. I almost think that should be a term, because they talk about data governance, but really it's policies, and sometimes they're enforced, sometimes they're not. Is that real governance? I don't think so. I think real governance requires a comprehensive view of what's happening and the ability to get audit trails and the ability to put guardrails in place. So that's one of the other really challenges that you're going to be solving. Maybe Tomer comment and then Jeremy.
Yeah, I agree. Unless you have a centralized platform, it's impossible to achieve that, right? Because once you start copying data, your permissions don't travel with the data, and very quickly you get to a point where you don't know who's accessing what. You have no visibility into that as an IT organization. And complying with things like GDPR. Well, if every data scientist is exporting data into files on their laptop, well, and somebody has to be deleted, you can't do that. So once copies start, you just can't do that anymore. And so the only way to solve data governance and security and compliance is to have a centralized platform that can enable self-service, where the users want to come to that platform. It's really fast, they enjoy using it, and they don't have to look elsewhere.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, that was the life that I lived at Intel for many years, was dealing with the data marts and the discrepancy in data and the copies and the growth in cloud. And to all those points, that all became an output mechanism for lack of some of the things we've talked about. Lack of democratized data, trying to control too much of that access, no self-service, all those pieces, time to value. So if we can overcome those challenges, there's less likelihood of that sort of sprawl. And I think, that piece is so critically important, that we're there to support the business group on the pace that they're trying to innovate with this kind of, overarching platform strategy. So absolutely agree.
Yeah, and real quick, we've got about a minute and a half left. Tomer, I'll throw this over to you. One of my main talking points is morale, and that when morale is high in your organization, good things happen. When morale is low, things that are not so good can happen. And if you solve a lot of these challenges with the data platform, morale goes way up, because people can get access to the data, they can do their analysis, and they're not constantly working from a rear guard strategy of trying to put out fires all day. So would you agree that we're really going to be boosting morale for everyone involved if we just embrace this approach going forward? What do you think, Tomer?
Yeah, I don't know about you, but when I can do things on my own, I'm happy. And when I'm waiting on the line for somebody else to help me with something, then I start getting really angry, and that's in everything in life. So I couldn't agree more.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And I guess we got 50 seconds left. The edge is so exciting. I'll throw it over to you, Tomer. The edge is so exciting. It's a whole new topography out there, all kinds of things we can do if we can leverage data. This is, again, a good reason to embrace the platform approach now, right? Very quickly, Tomer.
Yeah, we already see that. Many of our customers are processing and analyzing IoT data from many different types of kind of applications and industries. So that's becoming a big thing.
I love it. Well, folks, thank you so much for coming. I saw that the number of people attending today was fantastic. It was like 1,500. The appetite is very strong out there for data, for analytics, Remember, folks, analytics drives the information economy. Hope to see you at the next Subsurface. We'll talk to you soon, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.